After more than a decade of YouTubers hacking together camera gear to film themselves, manufacturers are finally listening and giving us cameras purpose-built for vlogging and YouTubing. I have 5 cameras, the 5 greatest vlogging cameras, and I'm gonna test them side by side in a few different configurations. The first camera I'm gonna test is, of course, the mighty iPhone. Not a traditional camera, but this is the camera that more people start out with than any other camera. Unfortunately, you're stuck using that front-facing camera, so how will it hold up? Next camera. For 500 bucks, you can upgrade to a real camera that can change the lens, and it has a flip screen on it. The Canon M50 is incredibly popular among vloggers, but will it hold up against the newer cameras? The Sony ZV-1. Almost pocket size, a flip screen, a hot shoe, which has a little secret in it. You can attach a microphone without having to run a separate cable. But if you do want to run a separate cable, that cable jack is on the grip, so it doesn't block your screen when you plug it in. Thank you, Sony, for actually designing a camera for vloggers. But it's got some problems, like the touch screen here doesn't allow you to change settings. So you have to fuss with the rear dials to actually adjust any settings manually. Next camera, the Canon EOS RP. This is a full frame camera. Just check out the size of that sensor. But the best part, it's only $900. And it's got everything a vlogger might need. It's got a flip forward screen so you can film yourself and a fantastic user interface that allows you to touch the settings and adjust them from the front of the camera. It's also got a proper electronic viewfinder, just like the Canon M50, but the Sony ZV-1 doesn't have that. Okay, you can't use the viewfinder when you're in front of the camera, right? But you can use it to review your footage, especially in bright sun. That's really, really helpful. It's also really good for getting B-roll. Next camera. This one I'm very excited about. This is the Fujifilm X-T4. Fuji gives us 4K footage at 60 frames per second. That flip screen and the ability to change lenses. Sure, the sensor is a little smaller than the Canon EOS RP, and at 1,600 bucks without a lens, it's quite a bit more expensive, but it's got some tricks up its sleeve, like amazing high quality video and the ability to take full frame lenses and adapt them to get full frame results. We'll test that out. Let's move on to testing our first camera. Now we're filming with the iPhone, and what I want you to look for are the quality of my skin tones, the amount of background blur that I have behind me, and the ability for it to track focus as I move in and out. I'll say this is really nice because the iPhone screen is much bigger than any of the other cameras, but I have to film with the front-facing camera, which is lower quality than the rear-facing cameras. Let's do the unboxing test. Pop into frame, pop out of frame, pop into frame, pop out of frame. I'm confident the iPhone is not going to win the video quality test, but the usability test, it's a huge win. Reviewing the footage back on the big screen is super easy, and it's definitely brighter in sun than any of these other cameras. You can edit the footage right on your iPhone and upload it right from there. That supports all sorts of live streaming. The versatility of a smartphone cannot be beat, but what about the video quality? Let's check our next camera. Next up is the Canon EOS M50. You might even notice some extra background blur behind me. Makes it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more professional. This camera is only HD, whereas even my iPhone was 4K. The detail and quality of your video is not determined by the resolution of the camera alone, but rather a combination of the sensor and the lens. One nice thing about this is you can adapt a wide variety of Canon lenses to it, even though right now I'm filming just with the kit lens that comes with the $500 kit. Let's check out the autofocus by showing off these nice wooden headphones. Snaps into focus nice and quick, and it's this Canon dual pixel autofocus that has really made them famous. This is the reason that we switched from Panasonic to Canon for our own vlogging, even though it meant we had to drop down to 1080. Let me show you the user interface on this. I can easily make changes to the aperture, for example, to increase it so that I can get a sharper background. And now you can see the background is quite a bit sharper. That's right, you don't always have to shoot wide open. but you might want to because it does make your videos look a little bit more pro. While the video quality might be better, the convenience is worse than the iPhone. This camera uses SD cards for storage, which means that every time you film something, you have to take the SD card out, connect it to an SD card reader, pull it into your phone or tablet or laptop before you can do the editing on it. SD cards are a little bit antiquated. Technically, it has a Wi-Fi app, but don't let that fool you. The Wi-Fi is excruciatingly slow to the point where it's essentially unusable for transferring video. Let's check out our next camera. This is the $750 Sony ZV-1, and it can do a lot of cool things, like connecting a microphone to the hot shoe without a cable and attaching a specialized mini tripod adapter that connects to the camera via Bluetooth, giving you some easy buttons to record on. This camera technically supports 4K 30, and that looks pretty good, but me myself, for YouTube, I like to shoot at 60 frames per second, and if you want to do that, you still have to drop down to HD, just like the Canons. Let's check out the focusing test as we pull this subject into focus. I'll say that, unlike the Canon, this one has a special product showcase mode, which is designed specifically to allow you to focus on subjects in the foreground and ignore your face. This has one big disadvantage over the other full cameras that we'll see here, in that it has a built-in lens that cannot be changed. So this is as wide as you can possibly go. It does have a power zoom to make up for it, so you can smoothly pull in for intense effects. Before we review the high-end cameras, let's compare the image quality of the cameras below $1,000. To me, the iPhone looks too flat, the Canon looks very contrasty, and the Sony is somewhere in between. This is the Canon EOS RP, and when we first switched to it, we got so many questions asking, wow, what camera are you using? And that's the best compliment you can get for gear, because sometimes the camera really does make a difference. One of the key elements of this great effect is the ability to use really fast lenses, like the full-frame 24mm f1.4 now. That term fast means that the front element of the lens can be really big. You know, that piece of glass at the front? It can gather a whole bunch of light and really perform well in low light. So you get to pick exactly the right f-stop with the option to blur the background as much as you want. Let's take a look at these wooden headphones to see how it does. Back to my face, a little bit of delay. Back to the headphones. Back to my face. In the previous test, I was using eye detect autofocus, so it tries to find a face. Here, I'll switch to Zone AF and see if it does a little bit better for product photography in this particular mode. This works more like Product Showcase does on the Sony. This is the Fujifilm X-T4 recording in a gorgeous 4K at 60 frames per second. I'm using the 16mm f1.4 to give me an approximation of that 24mm f1.4 that I had on the full-frame EOS RP. So you see some nice background blur back there, right? Maybe not quite as much, but it should look pretty good. Let's see how it does on the close-ups. Back to my face, back to the close-up, back to my face. Okay, seems to be tracking my eye pretty good. 4K is cool, but it has like a 1.3 crop, so it's not quite as wide as it could be. So let's drop into HD mode and check it out. Here we are in full HD mode, which uses the full width of the frame. It got a little wider, and that also means that I'll get a little more background blur for the same subject size that I have. Let's see how it does on the close-ups. Right back to my eye. It's doing a pretty good job of switching between my left and right eye to find the closest one. Okay, this looks pretty good, but it's f1.4 on an APS-C camera, and I kind of miss that f1.4 on a full-frame camera look. That's suddenly an option though, because Metabones, a third-party company, released an adapter, a speed booster, that will let me use my Canon 24 f1.4 on this with almost no loss in that all-important bokeh. So let's check it out. So here we are with a full-frame lens on an X-T4. It is so cool. The camera's reading this aperture as f1, which is the original lens's f1.4 times 0.71. Basically, it gets us almost back to full-frame image quality. with the body that I love and the ability to do 4K 60. Let's see how it does on the close-ups. One of my big concerns is how this adapter is going to handle autofocus, because after all, Fuji didn't make the X-T4 specifically to work with this Canon lens, and if it actually can, it might just be a miracle. This just wasn't as clear cut. Both the Canon EOS RP and Fujifilm X-T4 did excellent. Which looks better? I need to do more tests, and you're watching it right now. This is the Canon EOS RP with the 85mm f1.2 lens. So let's switch over to the Fuji and see how that looks. This is the Fuji 56mm f1.2 shooting wide open. Is this enough background blur for everything you might ever want to use it for? It's worth mentioning that the Fujifilm has 2 card slots, so if an SD card fails, I can always go to the backup. That's something that the Canon lacks and something I'd really appreciate using. So if I can make this work, I will. This is the Canon EOS RP with the 50 f1.2, a lens that's not available for any other video autofocus system, so you can really squeeze the most background blur out of any scene. This is the Fujifilm X-T4 with a 35mm f1.4. It's not going to give me quite as much background blur, but is it good enough? And it does have 2 card slots, so if one SD card fails, I'm still protected, whereas with the Canon, I would be forced to reshoot. And remember, with the Canon, I can always shut down to this amount of background blur. You never are forced to have more bokeh than you want. This is Canon's 24mm f1.4, and I like it because when I'm standing further back, it gives me just a little bit of background separation. You can see it's not crazy amounts of bokeh. It's also nice because I can push in, and it does a pretty good job of keeping focus, and when you get intimately close, the background is completely separated. And this is Fujifilm's 24mm lens shooting wide open. You can see there's not a ton of background separation, even with a pretty fast lens, until you get really kind of uncomfortably close, and then you see plenty of it. Is this good enough for every scenario you might want to shoot? You tell me in the comments. No doubt the Fujifilm X-T4 absolutely sucked. This is so disappointing because Fuji went to such extremes to give us a flip forward screen and 4K 60 and sensor stabilization, and then somehow they can't keep somebody in focus without jumping wildly, and they don't have stepless exposure changes, which smartphones, literally every other camera has. We reached out to Fuji and they said, hey, maybe if you turn off eye detect autofocus, one of their big selling points, maybe it'll work a little bit better. This is with the eye detect AF turned off. Now I'm recording with the tracking sensitivity sent to +4, and I have eye detect autofocus turned off. I'm going to step forward just to see how it handles with a little bit shallower depth of field. Want to see if it's jumping around at all, or if it's actually locked onto my face. I want to just continue kind of talking, and this is with face detect AF and the tracking sensitivity set to 0, which should mean it's the most jumpy. And I'm just going to push in a little bit and see if it can continue to maintain focus. And I just need to wait, talk with my hands a little bit, see if it's going to jump. Right now, I have to say I'm going to have to stick with the EOS RP. Even though I missed the dual card slots, even though I missed the 4K 60, maybe Fuji will release a firmware update that fixes those problems. Subscribe to see the re-review if, maybe when that happens. Now let's do the walking test. You will probably see a small dog in most of these frames. I want to see how well it stabilizes as I'm walking. Also, how well it adjusts the exposure as I move from bright to dark rooms. Now with the Canon M50, it's nice and compact, pretty light, thus it's pretty easy to carry, but it only has the lens stabilization, no sensor stabilization, so it might not be quite as smooth. I will also try it with the electronic stabilization to see how much that helps to save you having to do stabilization in post. This is with the enhanced IS, which actually makes the lens a little bit too tight, but it adds a little extra stabilization, and I guess I can kind of still work with it if I'm holding my arm all the way out. Okay, it's adjusting the exposure pretty well. This is the Sony ZV-1 with the steady shot in enhanced mode, which provides both sensor stabilization and software-based stabilization, so you don't have to run stabilization in post. And I'm curious to see how it's going to compare to the other cameras. The auto exposure seems to be working pretty well. This is the Canon EOS RP. It also has dual stabilization because this lens, the 16-35 f4, has stabilization built in, and then it's doing the software stabilization, just like stabilizing it in post pretty much. This rig is way heavier than the Sony though. My arm's already getting a little tired, but it seems to produce pretty good results. Last up is the Fuji X-T4. Check out that creepy thing. I'm using the 10-24 lens. It's a zoom lens, so I get to choose like how much or how little of me you see. And I generally like to be a little wider when I'm walking because that brings the microphone a little closer to me and shows more of the background. You're not going to get a huge amount of background blur with this. I could use the other lenses, but my hope was that this lens, because it's stabilized, would work well with the sensor stabilization and give me a nice, smooth shot. Looking at those results, the iPhone actually looked great, and I wouldn't feel the need to upgrade for that type of video. The Canon M50 was really nice and smooth, but it was a little tight with the kit lens, so I might want to upgrade to the wide angle lens for that stuff. I found the Sony ZV-1 to be unacceptable. It's weird and jerky, even with the extra level of stabilization. I thought that the Canon EOS RP was also unacceptable. The most expensive camera, the Fujifilm X-T4, was really great with those sort of walking videos, but I still didn't see the advantage over something like the $500 Canon M50. So if I were doing only walking videos, I still might just be happy with that M50. In the comments down below, tell me which of the cameras you thought worked the best, because you see the same footage that I do. Which ones are worth the money and which ones are overpriced? What are you shooting with now and why? I'd love to hear, because I'm always interested in the different types of solutions that us creators hack together. I'm also going to make a video soon telling manufacturers exactly what we need in the next generation of camera for creators. So tell me what you're missing from every camera in the market, and maybe we'll get the next camera with that feature. Thanks, don't forget to subscribe and like. Bye. This is Pixel, by the way. This doesn't have animal IAF though. I almost forgot to mention the unsung hero of this video is this Tascam lavalier mic. It records to memory internally, so it's not wirelessly attached to anything, which means it can work with literally any camera, even one without a mic jack. You sync up the audio in post, so you need a real video editing app that can do that, like Final Cut or Premiere Pro. The sound is awesome. It records to 2 audio files simultaneously, so if one is peaking, I can go with the quieter audio, and the battery seems to last for like years. It can record just hours and hours of video, so I often just start it and not even worry about it until my video is completely finished. Anyway, if you want good sound and you don't mind syncing, it's an incredibly convenient tool to have in your bag.